Stories and pics of creepy urban legends thread. Here's mine of church that's supposedly haunted in Mason, TN. If you take the stick out of the door it's supposed to bring you bad luck. And here's the angel in the back of the church.
Chetwynd, BC, Can. The whole town. I grew up hearing all sorts of stories. One is from back in the 1940s about a man who went to one of the local pubs at the time. He was very tall, didn't speak much, but well-mannered when he did. He wore a long overcoat, with a wide-brimmed hat, and his steps would come with a click. He just sat at the bar mostly silent, and sometimes he would dance with people. He would dance with somebody a while, then he would dance 3 circles around the person. After he had started coming to the pub, people started to go missing on occasion. My grandfather and his friends started to pay attention to the people in the pub. This man with the wide brim hat became a person of interest to the group, and they started watching him. They watched him dance. He made 3 circles around the next person. That person ended up disappearing. A couple days later they were at the pub and this man walked in, wearing his overcoat and hat. He sat at the bar like he always would, and when he got up to dance my grandfather and company got up too and stopped him, asking him to leave. The man obliged and started walking away. As he opened the door to the pub a breeze blew his coat up at the feet. My grandfather's friend noticed something strange about the man. He whispered to my grandfather that the man had hooves. My grandfather looked closely as the man left the building, and sure enough the man had hooves. My grandfather and his friends followed this man, and when they were far enough away from the pub they ran up to the man surrounding him and attacked him. The man opened his overcoat revealing that he had the legs of a goat. My grandfather and his friends killed the creature, apparently chopped it up and then buried it in a cloth bag. In the forest. When I was born the town had expanded, and the place where my grandfather buried the remains of that creature was now a part of the town, and he said that where one of my friends lived is where he buried it.
I have a couple of ones. Local museum is visited by a little girl at nights. Local church has a painting of a nun who gets out of her painting and walks around. In the 1500s a man sold his soul to the devil. Also at the time another woman killed her husband. Obviously the house is super haunted. A policeman died in a gang fight and his spirit still roams the place. I also have a couple of ones an old man told me once and, supposedly, happened to him. Which one do you want me to tell you first?
Share the painting one anon.
There is not much to it. Colonial times. QT 3.14 Nun. Artist paints her face on orders of her family. This was usual when them nuns started their careers. Thing is, no one knows who she is or where she used to do her nun stuff. People, especially night shift guards, tell stories about how the church and the ex-convent are haunted. Spooky sounds and shadows. Allegedly the nun gets down of her painting and roams the halls. I've never seen her do that, but let me tell ya the place sure as hell feels spooky. The one about Don Bartolo is one of my personal favorites. Colonial times. Newcomer arrives to town from Spain. DB is into the occult and shit. DB is in love with his sister-in-law. DB makes a pact with the devil. He will sell his soul to him if he gives him wealth and the love of his sister-in-law. Satan agrees with him on the condition that he will come pick his soul himself when DB turns 25. Fast forward to his 25th birthday. DB is pimping around making this huge party, walking around with the most beautiful girl around who turns out to be, you guessed it, spoiler lit, his sister-in-law / spoiler lit. When midnight comes and all the guests leave, DB locks himself up in his house. People in the street and all around town, keep in mind the city was small at the time, hear this insanely creepy scream followed by this explosion. I'm talking 10 tons of dynamite explosion level here. Obviously the scream and the explosion came from DB's house. When the townsfolk roll into his crib they first smell this rotten egg smell. Then they enter the house. Oh god. JPEG. The whole house smells like rotting meat and rusting iron. DB's wife is dead on the floor with this horrified expression on her face. DB is nowhere to be found. There's this giant circular burn in the ceiling. After that the house was bought a couple of times but no one wanted to stay for long. Today it's a government building. It is impossible to clean that burning in the ceiling, it just keeps reappearing. Also I've got a couple of ones that don't deal on the paranormal but they also creepy AF. Like the one of Majangos. B 1998. Family moves into town from the north of the country. Mother, father, and 3 elementary school grade kids. The mother has a history of mental illness. She is also extremely religious. Because of this her husband gets tired of her and decides to divorce her. This sends her into a worse state than she was before. One night the voices in her head become stronger than before. Mazatlan Hokkaido, Querétaro Sieg, Salvate y tus hijos. Mazatlan has fallen, Querétaro is next, save yourself and your kids. Mazatlan was her hometown. She kills all of her kids in their rooms. Neighbors were used to hearing the kids scream because crazy mom. Next day they realize what happened when the cops rolled into town because of the smell. Holy shit. JPEG. The place looks like a bloodbath. She was arrested and is about to be released next year. The house was blocked by the neighbors because kids would usually get inside the house and do them satanic rituals and shit. The place is actually near my home. I've never been inside but just from being outside you can feel some weird shit.
Only urban legend I know of from my town is the Squallies. The most commonly believed story is that they're the product of a government genetics experiment that went haywire. Short, child height, pig-like snouts, crazy old man that will shoot anybody who trespasses. House has no address. No fly zone over the house. Went there a couple years ago with some friends. Some of the stuff checked out with the legend, like small gates and pathways just big enough for children, and when we walked down the driveway and up by the house we all got the same spoopa feeling. If anybody cares, I'll be back in the area in a couple weeks and I'll gather a group to go out and explore, and we'll make a thread beforehand and post pics as we go.
In Georgia where I'm from there is a Native American legend of a creature known as the Wog that lives around a volcanic swamp. Native American accounts describe a vicious, devil Wog, but it had mellowed considerably by the time American settlers appeared in the area. Occasionally it would approach cabins, announcing its arrival by making its whirling tail sound, and poke its long, forked tongue through chinks between the logs. Google has a lot more info.
I didn't know early settlers made their homes out of Chinese.
His great red eyes were very repulsive, but not so much as his forked tongue, the prongs of which were thought to be 8 inches long and played in and out of his mouth like those of a mad snake. Really the meanest feature about the beast was that his bear-like head contained a set of great white teeth over which his ugly lips never closed. To the Creeks Notarock, the volcanic swamp, was hell and the Wog was Satan. They believed evil souls spent eternity in the volcanic bog and their bodies were often cast into the boiling mud, where they were welcomed by its host. At times the cauldron burned hotter and Native Americans contended the Wog was angry because it desired more victims. Additional sacrifices were hurled into the mud from fear that the Wog would leave the bog by night and seize local villagers. Prisoners of war and condemned criminals were commonly thrown to the Wog.
Local sports editor is an alcoholic, abusive towards his wife. They separate, but keep in touch. He promises to stay off the liquor, and they meet to reconcile. They were seen meeting up and heading off towards the rocky shoreline in the early evening. 2 days later, their parents reported them missing. The following Sunday, the wife is found in some tall grass by the water, strangled and bludgeoned, and also shoeless. The husband's body was found a month later by a fisherman, tangled in some kelp. He had his wife's shoes on him. Supposedly, the wife haunts the stretch of coast where she was found, the area now a golf course. Teens in the area go at night to ring the bell located between the 7th and 8th hole, which for some reason is meant to summon the ghost. There's no real connection between the bell and the murder, I think. Before all that nonsense got started, she was just said to appear to young couples, and was a bad omen. If a pair of lovers saw her, their romance was doomed. Witnesses sometimes have described her as wearing a long flowing white gown with her arms outstretched. Several people, including a group of university students in the 1960s, saw her rush toward them and then simply disappear. She is known to move very fast at times. One witness, a man, reported that she appeared directly in front of him. Frightened, he turned around, but she was facing him once more. He turned several more times, but she always blocked his way. Then she just disappeared.
I live in Poland, near the border with Ukraine. In my town in the 13th century, people found out the city lays on chalk. As it was a pretty valuable resource back then, it was begun to be dug out regularly by most of the citizens. Not to bother themselves with making a single entrance and have to walk to it later every day, people just dug from their basements and sold the chalk to other cities. After some time, the tunnel net was connected to almost every house in the city and to every public building to have better access to the chalk, to use it as a shortcut or in case of being attacked by the Russians. With such massive scale of digging under the city, accidents happened on regular basis. But of course we don't need any security because we are Slavs. Lots of people died in the chalk mine because of the walls collapsing, and also war prisoners were kept there and tortured, so it was believed to be haunted. Also lots of people were murdered there because it was a nice and lone place to get rid of a body. But the chalk mining was not abandoned until the net of tunnels spread under the whole city, had 5 levels, and even reached neighboring cities in the 19th century. The mine tunnels saved lots of people from the Russians, but everybody who was there knew it was not a good idea to wander too far in them, as people who once get lost in there never come back. People who have worked there claim to be constantly hearing moans and screams. Also there's a legend about a ghost that lives there and is a protector of the city. Nowadays the tunnel net is approximated to hold the length of 40 kilometers but is inaccessible. Officially there's a tourist trip in there, but it's only like 500 m and you gotta go with a guide, as it is very dangerous because of the slippery chalk water floor and deep water wells. My first time there was spooky as hell, even when we were in a 30-person group. TLDR. Chalk mines be spooky as FK, also skeletons and ghosts. Pick related.
Indiana friend here. This place is like the capital of urban legends in the Midwest. I have a couple people I go legend tripping with just for fun because there's so many out by us. We record most of our investigations on YouTube, so you can probably find them if you search for haunted places in Indiana. Here's some places that are literally no more than 2 hours from where I live. Primrose Road, South Bend Inn, basically the most well-known haunt. It's an old dirt road where basically every stereotypical thing can happen, like apparitions, orbs of light, UFOs, creatures lurking in the woods, occult sacrifices, and something about a legendary boulder called the Blood Rock that'll either bless you or curse you by touching it. I've been here and personally it's all hype and no action. Dogface Bridge, San Pierre Inn, basically a couple of old iron bridges decaying in the woods. Legend says that at night there's a creature roaming the woods with the body of a woman and the head of a dog and will murder you if it finds you. The Old Craven's Factory, North Judson Inn, I've been here only during the daytime. I tried to go at night but I got a disturbing vibe from the place and booked it. Basically it's huge ass factory that's been sitting completely abandoned. The original owner of the place shot himself in the mechanic's garage and now the place is all sorts of weird. Apparently something wakes up in the nearby cornfields at 1:30 a.m. and throws shit at you, and some accounts have claimed to have seen dead horses lying in front of the factory's gates. Devil's Bridge, Pines Inn, underneath Highway 20 is a dark road covered in graffiti and surrounded by fenced-off woods. Back in the 70s apparently police found a shit ton of bodies dumped here, some of which are theorized to still be there to this day. There has been a ton of strange happenings, sightings, murders, animal sacrifices, large skeletal remains, and signs of cult activity. Sucks there's a character limit.
2 stories to tell here. The first is purely urban legend and holds not a scrap of truth. The second is an old Cherokee legend and there are numerous stories passed down from the early settlers about it. The Sensabaugh Tunnel Murders. In Kingsport, Tennessee, if you drive down Netherland Inn Road toward Hawkins Co., you'll come to the old Rotherwood Mansion on your left. More on Rotherwood and my own personal experiences there in a later post. Across from Rotherwood is Big Elm RD. Big Elm runs alongside the Holson River, and about a mile or so down the road it forks. The left fork goes uphill and crosses over top of a small mountain ridge. The right fork continues along the river. About a mile further along the river and you'll come to a dirt road on your left. This is Sensabaugh Hollow RD. A couple hundred yards down you'll come to a poorly maintained graffiti-covered tunnel, which is actually a culvert, that runs below the Clinchfield Railroad, for the creek, and is always slightly flooded. This is the tunnel that is commonly referred to as Sensabaugh Tunnel, the old Sensabaugh homestead being situated at the other end of the tunnel. Urban legend says that either a hobo or old man Sensabaugh murdered the Sensabaugh mother and children and threw their bodies in the tunnel, and that if you go in the tunnel at night and turn off your headlights and motor, that you can hear a baby crying, or a woman weeping, or children giggling, or that you'll see a figure with glowing red eyes in your rear view mirror, and that your car engine won't start. This is all entirely bullshit. The Sensabaughs have lived there since the 40s and no one was murdered. Furthermore, the actual Sensabaugh Tunnel is a train tunnel about a mile away near the old abandoned Five Caves quarry. I've walked/driven in this tunnel many times as a teenager and never felt the least bit of apprehension. However, there is a small foot tunnel/culvert near the aforementioned tunnel that's overgrown with vines and difficult to spot if you don't know where it is. I walked this smaller tunnel one night, and only once. It was in October, a few days before Halloween, and kind of chilly. Me and a couple of my high school buds heard tell of this other tunnel and decided to check it out. We got there in late afternoon, it was still light, took us a while to find the tunnel. By the time we did it was dark. The tunnel wasn't long, it just went to the other side of the railroad berm, yet we could see no light at the other end. We started in pulling vines, tree roots, and other growth out of our way from the mouth of the small tunnel. I went first. Even though it was chilly, in the tunnel it was hot. As soon as I stepped inside it was pitch black, we had no flashlight, and all sound, crickets, the creek running outside, the distant hum of traffic on Stone Doctor were completely blocked. All I could hear was the trickle of the steam that ran through the tunnel and my boots splashing in it as I walked, and I still couldn't see the other end of the tunnel. Brad and Chris, the two guys with me, were apprehensive and didn't want to go, but I urged them along. As I made my way through the tunnel, it was obvious no one had walked this tunnel in a very long time. The ceiling was only about 8 feet and the tunnel about 5 feet wide. Slimy strings of moss hung from the ceiling and I had to brush cobwebs away at each step. I could hear Brad's footsteps softly splashing along behind me, so close that I could hear him breathing. I also had the impression of many voices whispering, but figured it was just my imagination. Finally reaching the other side after what I figured was about 30 feet, I emerged to see a few houses, none too close by, and it was quite dark. Well, that wasn't so bad. I announced to no one, as when I turned around neither Brad nor Chris was behind me. I approached the mouth of the tunnel calling their names in a questioning voice. The only response I got was once again the whispering. I stumbled back from the tunnel, shaken. I could faintly hear Brad and Chris calling my name from the other side of the berm. I stared into the tunnel, realizing that it was still pitch black, but that I should be able to see some light from a nearby halogen lamp mounted on a tall pole on the Sensabaugh property. I ran from the tunnel mouth and scrambled up the steep berm. It was about 30 feet up, crossed over the tracks and nearly tumbled down the other side. Brad and Chris had never entered more than a few feet into the tunnel before they got scared and turned back, yet I distinctly heard footsteps and breathing close behind me in the tunnel. They said they were calling to me to come back from the moment they stepped out of the tunnel, but I was unable to hear them until I exited the other end. We never went back there. Next, the legend of the Olongadaghlala or Long Dog. The Olongadaghlala is an old Cherokee legend on a hairy, mangy dog-like creature the size of a man that would sometimes walk on its hind legs. Kinda sounds like a werewolf, doesn't it? It's said that people walking on Big Elm Road at night would occasionally go missing, and that their mangled remains would be found along the road, or sometimes just a bloody mess would be found but no body, accompanied by the acrid stench of burnt sulfur and skunk spray. Those who escaped the Long Dog and the Cherokee name, Olongadaghlala, came to be known, reported a huge mangy hound the size of a man with burning red eyes, that sometimes walked upright and smelled like burning sulfur and death. Other stories report encounters with victims of the long dog whose bodies were never found returning as ravaged revenants who attacked the living. Whenever a person disappeared, locals would report hearing low guttural, moaning and howls in the night from the nearby woods. Later, the haunting of Rotherwood Mansion.
Okay, my friend is a Native American and he has a few friends. Grandpa taking his horse from the grazing fields home through the town. This is early 1900s. A woman calls out to him asking him to give him a ride. He quickly sits on the horse because the woman is a renowned witch. She scoffs at his grandpa and mutters something. Grandpa quickly travels further away because having an encounter with a witch is a big thing. It's twilight. Grandpa feels someone is sitting behind his horse. He looks back and sees the witch. He swiftly gets off the horse, half in fear and to force her to get off. She has vanished. There is some ash on the horse where she was sitting. Grandpa goes home. Gets high fever. Mutters something about the devil and witch. Cries in agony for 4 months. Dies a painful death. Second one below. Early 1980s. A guy proposes to marry a girl he likes. The girl refuses. The heartbroken man drinks himself half to death. Limps his way to the end of the town to kill himself by jumping off the bridge. Notices an abandoned house. Gets a strong urge to go in the house, so he enters. The door closes behind him. There is nothing in the house but a bed and a woman waiting on the bed. The woman is the most beautiful one he has ever laid his eyes upon. Her skin is dazzling white, and she looks just like the woman who turned him down. She is wearing a green velvet dress. He instantly falls in love with the woman, a strong irresistible urge to embrace her. They both fall on the bed kissing and making love the whole night. When they're finished, the man gives her the ring his fiancée refused. She begins smiling and kisses him and tells him she loves her. They both fall asleep on the bed. The man wakes up in the morning. He experiences a severe pain in his crotch as he wakes up. He gets the blanket off, and witnesses his crotch oozing blood. He panics and tries to tell his lover about this. He gets the blanket off the woman. A skeleton lies where his beloved should have been, with a ring on its finger.
My grandma's family had a bunch of weird superstitions, and anytime they were questioned, the answer always was to keep strangers away or to keep them from getting you. Anytime we went to that cemetery with the fence, we would always take shovels and buckets. If a grave was starting to sink in, we had to haul dirt to level the ground out, cause they are trying to get out. Don't step in the hole, they might get ya. If the summer was really dry and the ground was cracking, we had to haul water because they might come through the cracks. My grandma always kept lamps in front of the windows, but at night she would either keep the lamps on or close the blinds. We don't want them watching us. Her closest neighbor was close half a mile away. Finally, when I was like 5 or 6, she bought a bunch of those lights that look like candles and put one at every window. When she was growing up, before the area had electricity, her mother kept candles in the windows for the same reason. Mostly the strangers only came out at night, except they could live underwater in the daytime. This was the reason given for why none of my grandma's kids could play in water deep than their knees. Wade out too deep and they'll grab you and drag you down deep. My grandmother never learned how to swim. None of her brothers or sisters or their kids ever swam. My aunt learned how to when she lived in Florida in her 30s. My mother is in her 50s and still won't go into water more than knee deep. If the power went out and we didn't have the lamps or candles in the windows, we would hang blankets up in all the windows and light kerosene lamps in all the bedrooms where people would be sleeping. Also, we couldn't play any games on Sunday that includes cards, dice, or drawing faces because that pissed them off for some reason. Thank God for Game Boys.
The only true ghost story I have involved a Boy Scout camping trip. About 6 of us were running around dark woods. I don't remember what we were doing, but at some point we were running down this ravine, playing tag, or some shit. Near the bottom I see this kid crawling out from under a log and it freaks me out, so I scream, everyone else screams, and we all turn and run. Before I turn around, the kid disappears and my first thought, it, trick of the moonlight. Then back at the camp another kid asks who was crawling on the ground. And then a third kid who was standing in a totally different vantage point says he saw the kid too. We were just kind of stunned. Someone was smart enough to suggest we go back and make sure there wasn't actually an injured person down there. Nope.
The mound building culture near Macon used to be haunted by this pale, hairless, black-eyed man who was not a man and spoke with 100 voices that drifted in every full moon and demanded mica, quartz, and 2 children from the noble bloodline of the plateau culture that used to live there, in exchange for letting them all live. Over time some of them set up shop farther down towards the swamps and built their mounds with walls and embattlements to keep the thing out, and it worked because apparently once it becomes used to a place it has no sense of time or geography and gets caught in a loop of coming back over and over. Eventually DeSoto came through and spread his filthy Eurotrash diseases and the Mississippian mound builder culture collapsed, and the main mound is now a national monument/archaeological park. I grew up in Macon and never stayed in the park after dark, mainly because there are actual rangers/guards there, but I have friends who broke into the woods surrounding it from some train tracks nearby on full moons, and they usually say either there's this omnipresent noise you hear inside your head like a swarm of bees or a shitton of trumpets, or a voice that sounds like someone you know who could not possibly be there telling you to come towards it in the woods. Source: my 1/4 Muskogee grandpa and everyone I grew up with.